Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Hooray!
It's not often when you get up on a stage and people sing to you. That was a really fantastic experience, and thank you very much. And kaya to everyone here, and can I also give my acknowledgements to the traditional owners. We're on Noongar Budja here, and thanks so much for coming out tonight on a cold night to talk about what could be a pretty hot topic. And this is such an important time in the campaign, in the battle to keep uranium in the ground here in Western Australia. What I wanted to talk about was some legal actions and a court case that we've initiated together with the traditional owners of Yaliri country. And I wanted to just give a bit of background and some context to that, and maybe connect a few dots that people haven't had connected because the mainstream media hasn't been following this particularly closely. But does everyone here recall, not so long ago, it's a horrible memory, when there was bulldozers tearing into our ancient ecology of the Belair wetlands just down the road? We will remember that. Well, something else happened at that time, and when the whole community effort was distracted on the Belair wetlands, the government actually made, the previous government, Minister Jacob and the Barnett government made one of the worst environmental decisions in Western Australia's history. And it was announced at that time. And the community was distracted and there wasn't enough and sufficient attention paid to it. But that decision was to give the environmental approval to the Yaliri uranium mine. Now, we know how corrupted the EPA had become under the Barnett government. And we know how they watered down so many environmental policies and paved the way for any kind of development just to be approved through that system. But even though that system was so corrupted and so badly watered down, the EPA still couldn't say yes to the Yaliri uranium mine because such was the environmental damage that project would do. And it comes down to one word. It comes down to one word, starting with E, extinction. Now, that's a word that we talk about a lot, but just reflect on that a minute. The EPA at the time said to the state government, this is going to cause the extinction of species. This is going to cause the extinction of species. And the minister at the time said, well, I'm more important, and the uranium industry, with all its jobs, which don't exist, is more important than the species, the existence of species. And extinction means gone forever. That's what extinction means. And he was prepared to sign off on a uranium proposal which will deliver very few jobs, dangerous jobs, and very little economic benefit, and tear up these beautiful parts of country, these beautiful parts of sacred earth, and allow extinction for the purpose of uranium mining. And he overrode the advice of the EPA and the recommendations of the EPA. He overrode thousands of submissions that were made by members of the public. He overrode and ignored appeals that were made by traditional owners of that country. He never went down to sit on country to talk to those people about decision making about their country. And he approved the Yaliri uranium mine. But in doing that, he set an extremely dangerous precedent in environmental law. Because if we're going to allow extinction for a uranium mine, what comes next? Now, what was going to be impacted by that mine was lots of things, but it was actually the incredible ecology that exists below the ground out in the desert. We know very little about it. Stygofauna, these incredible species that exist nowhere else on Earth. They've got very short ranges, and they would be driven to extinction through the pollution of groundwater and through the other impacts of uranium mining. And they said, well, don't worry about it, it's just stygofauna, underground species that no one really knows about. But if you allow the extinction of one species, doesn't matter how small or obscure it is, what comes next? And that's the legal precedent that this decision sets. What it means is that a minister in the future can allow the extinction of any species for some sort of development. And so we could see next the extinction of something like the iconic species Carnaby's cockatoo. Now, that might be a long bow to draw, you might think, between stygofauna and Carnaby's cockatoos, but let me tell you, it's not, because the same minister, before making that decision, it came out with a plan called the Green Growth Plan for Perth, which would eliminate half of the remaining population of endangered Carnaby's cockatoos. The same minister passed legislation in Parliament, called it the Biodiversity Protection Act, and created new powers for the government and the minister to approve extinction of species. They were acts of that same minister. And this is the policy and legal legacy that we are still left with today, that the new government has inherited. And it's a legacy that would allow extinction. And as the Peak Environment Group and as the traditional owners of that Yaliri country, we cannot let that legacy stand. We have to test that in the court. And that is why we've taken the action to test that in the Supreme Court of Western Australia, and they've accepted that there's a case to be heard on this. There was a directions hearing that happened earlier in the week, and Declan Doherty in the Environmental Defender's Office is representing the Conservation Council and the traditional owners, so thanks to them as well. And this is going to be dealt with by the courts, and we're going to deal with this question of whether or not it is legal for a minister to write off a species and allow the extinction of a whole species of creatures that we don't even know anything about. That is such an important thing that we test in the courts, but it's expensive to do so. But we need to do that because we cannot let that precedent stand. If we let that precedent stand, wildlife across our whole state is in danger and is in jeopardy by these kinds of decisions, by these kinds of ministers. And we can't rely on the fact that we've got a new government, who's a Labor government, to stand up for our wildlife either. We know they've already backed down on a previous election commitment they made, and they're allowing these 4 uranium mines to proceed through the approval system. And to this day, we're still arguing with them whether they're going to update the policies and the legislative framework and the standards that are going to be applied to these uranium mines as they move through that assessment process. So we need to test this in the courts, and we need to use our right to pursue these things through the judicial system. But we all need to do that together, because the Conservation Council and traditional owners, we need the help of the community to do that. And that's why we've tried to crowdfund and establish a crowdfund to support that legal case, because we can't carry that on our own. But as a community, if we all chip into that and if we all support that, we can take this action in the court, and hopefully, and I'm confident, that we can actually get a win and show that no, it is not legal to allow the extinction of species, whether it's for uranium mining or anything else. So I really appeal to everyone, if you can please donate. You can donate online to the crowdfund. You can donate here. There's actually an electronic device that you can use your credit card to donate to that crowdfunding campaign, because it's so important for the wildlife across the state that we do not let this legal precedent stand. But thanks so much for coming tonight, and thanks so much for being part of this community that is keeping uranium in the ground and protecting species and wildlife and standing up for traditional owners and Aboriginal people. So thanks for being part of that, and I hope that some of you are inspired tonight to go on the Walkajura Walkabout. I've been on it before, and it's an amazing experience. It's an incredible experience of connection to country. So I hope that some of you who weren't going to go before are now inspired to go on that as well. Thank you very much.